As the most endearing family of monsters on television, the Munsters are well known. One episode, however, went too far in 1965. This is the narrative that nearly put an end to the program, complete with dangerous stunts and illegal props. That day's events were so horrifying that the video was permanently archived. The true reason this episode never aired and the cast's decades-long silence about it are now being revealed. The 1960s was not the beginning of the Munsters concept. As a matter of fact, it started in the 1940s when Looney Tunes animator Bob Clampett had an idea for a humorous monster family animation. Despite his years of effort, it never gained traction. Just waiting, the idea sat at the appropriate time. The early 1960s marked the arrival of that time. Similar ideas were put out by comedy writers Alan Burns and Chris Hayward, who were well known for their work on Rocky and Bullwinkle. Charles Addams' cartoon in The New Yorker served as their inspiration, which had an endearing yet eerie family. But they looked to Universal Studios rather than coming up with something entirely unique. Classic monsters like Dracula and Frankenstein were owned by Universal. They recognized a chance to cast these well-known animals in a sitcom. That choice influenced everything. With bolts around his neck and a bumbling yet endearing demeanor, Herman Munster turned into a father in the vein of Frankenstein. Grandpa changed into a humorous Count Dracula. The family resided on a peaceful suburban street in a huge, dilapidated estate. They considered themselves to be a typical family. They were frightening to the others. The authors Ed Haas and Norm Liebman took this idea and made it a reality. The characters and the humorous tone of the program were established in the first pilot, Love Thy Monster, which they authored. The Munsters didn't intend to frighten. All they desired was a normal American family's life. It was the comedy's central theme. The moment was ideal. In the early 1960s, vintage monster films were becoming popular again. Universal had begun to re-release its classic horror movies, and people were falling in love with them again. The concept of combining sitcom humor with monsters was just what television needed. A significant influence on the show's development came from Universal Studios. They could use the old monster designs without any legal problems because they were theirs. As a result, the show had a distinctive appearance that was reminiscent of great horror movies from Hollywood. Additionally, the studio supplied excellent special effects and makeup. Legendary makeup artist Bud Westmore contributed to the series. In order to make Herman, Grandpa, and the others appear like genuine movie monsters, he made sure they were expressive enough for comedic effect. Universal also had an impact on the tone of the show in addition to its graphics. Rather than mocking horror films, the Munsters praised them. While the family's daily hardships could make mainstream viewers giggle, fans of vintage monsters could appreciate the illusions. Fundamentally, the Munsters was a parody of suburban life. The family thought they were perfectly normal. Together, they ate dinner, went to work and school, and fretted over common issues. However, they were often frightening and confusing their neighbors due to their hideous features. The show cleverly used this contrast to its advantage. The program also made fun of conventional family comedy. In one episode, Lily urges Herman to speak with Eddie like a father would in Father Knows Best or Leave It to Beaver. The situation becomes a joke, though, because Herman's counsel is so absurd. The show used these sitcom cliches in a humorous and novel way. As for Fred Gwynne and Al Lewis, they did more than just portray Herman and Grandpa Munster. The show revolved around them. Their trip to the Munsters began on a different sitcom called Years Ago. Where Are You? Their camaraderie was evident when they portrayed mismatched New York police cops. Together, they were adored by audiences. More significantly, they grew close in real life. Upon the arrival of the Munsters in early 1964, that bond persisted. As soon as casting started, executives knew who would play Herman and Grandpa. Lewis and Gwynne were selected first. The Munsters felt like a real family because of their relationship. He wore bulky boots with 4-inch lifts and multiple layers of cushioning, and turning Gwynne into Herman wasn't even that difficult. His costume cost an additional 40 to 50 pounds. The situation was exacerbated by the studio lights heat. One day while filming, he lost 10 pounds. In spite of everything, he put his all into every scene. Herman's rich voice, silly chuckle, and innocent appeal made him one of the most memorable TV characters ever. Long after the show ended, he and Lewis remained close off-screen. Their camaraderie matched the intensity of what viewers witnessed on TV. Not all casting choices were that straightforward. Joan Marshall originally performed the role of Phoebe, the Munster matriarch. But something was wrong. She bore too much like to Morticia Addams from The Addams Family, a rival program that was set to premiere. They made the decision to alter the two shows because viewers might confuse them. Lily Munster took Phoebe's position once she was dropped from the story. They had to find a new actress for it, and Yvonne De Carlo was their choice. De Carlo's dramatic roles made him famous. Her roles included serious movies like The 10 Commandments. Al Lewis and Fred Gwynne were first unhappy. De Carlo dispelled their doubts about her ability to handle the humor. One basic instruction was provided to her. Lily can be portrayed as a traditional 1950s housewife with a gothic edge. She knew just what she was supposed to do. Herman was silly, but she was elegant and charming. She quickly became a vital member of the Munster household. However, actor Butch Patrick was not the first to play Eddie Munster. Originally, Nate Happy Durman played Eddie in the unaired pilot. In that incarnation, Eddie was a spoiled brat. The light-hearted tone of the show didn't suit it, so they changed it. He gave Eddie a more likable demeanor when Patrick took over. He was playful but never cruel. Young viewers found him more relatable as a result, which improved the show's ability to engage families. The Munster family was more than just a part of Patrick's early years. His experience with Gwynne and Lewis taught him valuable acting skills. He has recalled how much fun it was to be on set during those years and has spoken positively about them. Those were memories he held with him even after the show ended. Marilyn Munster's role also evolved early on. Beverly Owen played her first, but she quit after 13 episodes. To begin with, she had never desired to accept the position. She was unhappy on set and had been duped into signing a contract. She occasionally even left crying. She eventually managed to breach her contract, forcing the producers to locate a substitute. At that point, Pat Priest took over. Priest blended right in. Marilyn never thought her family was odd, even though she was the only monster who had a normal appearance. They were just like any other to her. Some really funny moments resulted from that disparity. Additionally, her presence provided viewers with a relatable character and helped balance the show. Her portrayal of Marilyn became as iconic as the other Munsters, and Priest developed close relationships with her co-stars over time. The Munster house at 1313 Mockingbird Lane, nevertheless, was more than a location. It was a character unto itself. Although the house had the appearance of something from an old horror movie, it had a certain charm that gave it the sensation of a genuine home. Inspired by Victorian-era houses, particularly those in San Francisco, its style was darker and more spookier to reflect the Munsters' monster background. The house's facade was actually a mashup of a Hollywood set and an actual building. A house in the backlit of Universal Studios was altered to house the Munsters. Every component of the interior was meticulously planned on a staging. The underground laboratory, the dusty chandeliers, and the majestic staircase all contributed to the hilarity of the show. There were hidden rooms and secret passageways around the mansion, which frequently appeared in the narrative. Herman would occasionally crash through a wall by accident. At other times, Grandpa would mess up his experiments in the basement. There was no denying the show's homage to Universal's iconic horror movies. Movies like Dracula and Frankenstein served as inspiration for many of the house's characteristics. The house has the ideal balance of eerie and comical thanks to the impact of these movies. Although it appeared haunted, it was never truly frightful. The Munsters were as difficult to work on behind the scenes as they were to film. In addition to the challenges of performing under intense lighting, the actors had to cope with lengthy makeup procedures and bulky costumes. Filming was particularly challenging due to Fred Gwynne's suit. Even basic movements were difficult due to the layering of padding and the weight of his boots. Even though Yvonne De Carlo's outfits were stunning, they were challenging to wear. The Drag ULA, a car that like something from a Halloween fever dream, is one of the most bizarre items in Munster's past. A real fiberglass coffin was used to construct it. In the Rod Herman episode from 1965, Grandpa Munster had to construct a dragster in order to regain the family's other vehicle. This gave rise to the concept. It was difficult to procure the casket, though. It was against the law in California at the time to sell one without a death certificate. Working with the car's designer, George Barris, Richard Corky Corkeyes had to be cunning. A funeral establishment he located was open to a compromise. At night, they left the casket outside the rear entrance. No queries were raised. The remainder of the car quickly came together after they got it. It had 350 horsepower from a 289 cubic inch Ford V8 engine. There were enormous Firestone racing slick tires on the back, and the exhaust pipes resembled a cathedral. The small front wheels were from an antique buggy. As an added touch of spookiness, each hubcap featured a silver spider. The vehicle was featured in the film Munster Go Home. And during the years, at least 5 variations were constructed. Others found their way into private collections in museums. This was followed by the Munster coach. The purpose of the Munster coach was style, but the Dragulé was created for speed. It was developed by George Barris, who also designed the Batmobile in the 1960s. He extended 3 Model T bodies from 1926 over a chassis from a touring automobile built in 1927. As well known as the show itself was the Munster coach. Participated in exhibitions and parades, and some even found their way into private collections. Backstage, the actors faced their own challenges. The actor who played Grandpa Munster, Al Lewis, had to cope with an unexpected issue: his prosthetic nose. Initially, the nose was significantly longer than most fans recall, but something went wrong. His nose became moist, squishy, and distorted each time he drank coffee. It got so complicated that the cosmetics crew decided to cut it short. The Munsters' unaired pilot, Fair Munster, had a significant influence on the program. The purpose of filming it was to market the series to networks in late 1963. Although it was different from the final version that aired, this early version laid the groundwork. It was shot in color, which was one of the major surprises. It made sense because TV at the time was gravitating toward more colorful productions, but that changed when the show was formally picked up. Not only did black and white filming reduce money, but it also gave the series a vintage scary vibe, giving it the appearance of the classic monster films for which Universal was famous. The pilot was shot using the same suburban street scenario from Leave It to Beaver on Universal's back lot. Part of the joke was that, although the Munsters were intended to be just another typical family, they had a pet dragon and lived in a house that seemed haunted. The contrast added to the humor. Norman Abbott directed, and Ed Haas and Norm Leidman wrote the screenplay. Before this early version was ready for broadcast, a few things needed to be changed, but otherwise it had all the makings. The casting was one of the most significant variances. Phoebe Munster was portrayed by Joan Marshall in the pilot. Later, Yvonne De Carlo played this role, which was called Lily. Because Phoebe resembled Morticia from the Addams Family in appearance and behavior, the filmmakers reconsidered the part. They wanted Lily to be both eerie and nurturing. To achieve that balance, the actress was changed. And Eddie Munster was unique. His portrayal was Nate Derman, and he was a far more violent Eddie. With his snarling, erratic behavior, and cruel streak, he appeared more like a real monster than a playful child. Butch Patrick took his position as the performance progressed, and his addition to the cast made Eddie more jovial and approachable. Even though he was still a werewolf boy, he no longer felt like a monster from a horror film but rather like a typical comedy kid. Grandpa Munster remained the same as Herman. In the pilot, Fred Gwynne and Al Lewis were already cast, and their roles were essentially predetermined. But the way Herman was portrayed was slightly different. He was not yet as silly or endearing. He seemed more like a traditional Frankenstein monster in this form, with a deeper voice and a more solemn demeanor, rather than a silly but loving father. After the show was picked up, that situation altered. They softened his character, which made him more endearing and humorous. The pilot's voice also seemed off. There was some humor, but it was mostly horror-oriented. They even changed the soundtrack. There was a lively spirit to the pilot's theme music because it had a surf rock vibe. It didn't, however, exactly fit the show's eerie tone. With its brass-heavy motif, the finished version became one of the most iconic TV songs ever. The pilot accomplished what it had to do, in spite of its differences. It aided Universal Studios in pitching the Munsters to networks, demonstrating to them how comedy and horror could coexist in a family sitcom. CBS needed some adjustments, but they liked the concept. They requested a black and white format, a change to humor, and new casting. Because of these changes, the Munsters became a great success. Fans can now witness how the show changed by purchasing the unaired pilot on DVD. A unique look at an early iteration of something that would go on to become iconic. A humorous program about a family of monsters was not all that the Munsters was. It had a point. Beneath the slapstick and humor, it addressed important issues of acceptance and individuality. Despite their frightening appearance, the Munsters were loving, compassionate, and, to them, perfectly normal. That was not always the case, though, in the world around them. Operation Herman, a 1965 episode, was one that nicely encapsulated this. Eddie Munster was in the hospital recovering after a tonsillectomy. As the loving father that he was, Herman wanted to see him. The issue was that his massive frame and monstrous features made it practically hard to sneak in. What ensued was the quintessential hilarity of Munster. Comedy, miscommunications, and a hospital employee who thought Herman was a patient who had strayed. The program, however, was not just full of dumb jokes. Lily once recommends that Herman speak with Eddie directly. It was the kind of scene that frequently appeared in sitcoms about families at the time. Lily even brought up Father Knows Best, a program that is well known for its idealized portrayal of the American family. Such conversations were typically handled by Donna Reeve on The Donna Reed Show. Herman responded in his typical naive yet endearing manner. It was only a little joke, but it revealed the Munsters' self-perception. It had no intention of being the ideal, well-executed sitcom. It was something different, something that sympathized with the sense of alienation. Many programs included this theme. Before the Munsters moved in, the area was pleasant, according to a neighbor in My Fair Munster. Although the line was meant to be humorous, it captured a genuine problem in the 1960s. Many families experienced prejudice just because they were different. The attention was drawn even farther by Munster Masquerade, another episode. The sole family member that looked normal, Marilyn Munster, had a boyfriend. When his parents saw her relatives, they lost their excitement about meeting her. They didn't want to interact with Marilyn after learning that she hailed from a household full of monsters. The joke was successful because it was unexpected. Although Marilyn was the odd one out in her family, she was the only one that fit in with the outside world. The message was unambiguous. People make inaccurate assumptions about other people based on their outward appearance. In the entire series, Eddie's moniker was one of the most impactful moments. Herman sat down with Eddie to discuss since he was feeling insecure. One of the show's most memorable speeches was what he told him. "Is your character's strength in the size of your heart?" This was an audacious moment for a goofy sitcom. There was no comedy to conceal it. No joke could sweeten it. It was honest. It was sincere. And audiences responded favorably to it. The Munsters were unique because of this. There was more to it than monsters residing in everyday life. It had to do with how individuals regard others who are different. It conveyed a serious message with fun. In a manner that still seems relevant today, it accomplished this. There had never been a family sitcom like The Munsters when it debuted on television on September 24, 1964. However, it features creatures, a grandfather right out of a horror movie, a vampire mother, a werewolf son, and a father who resembles Frankenstein. It seemed odd, but it did the trick. By the end of its first season, it was one of the most watched TV programs because of the way it combined humor with traditional monster cliches. Like Gilligan's Island, it came in at number 18 in the Nielsen ratings. Even the critics paid attention. The show received a Golden Globe nomination for Best Television Program in 1965. An uncommon accolade for a comedy with such a unique concept. It would be nominated for several TV Land Awards years later, recognizing its enduring influence. In example, one award honored the cast change when Pat Priest took over as Marilyn Munster in place of Beverly Owen. No show remains at the top forever, yet the show managed to stay strong despite a big character being recast. ABC has a new edition in January 1966. With its vibrant colors, jam-packed episodes, and campy sense of fun, Batman captivated audiences from the moment it debuted. The focus of those who used to watch the Munsters was now Gotham City. It began to hurt the Munsters' ratings. It fell to number 61 in the rankings by the end of its second season. The call was placed by the network after it spotted the numbers. May 1966 saw the cancellation of the Munsters. Beyond its initial run, the Munsters have left a lasting legacy. In the 1960s, the eerie yet innocent charm of the Munster family has endured throughout the years thanks to spin-offs, movies, and reboots. From 1988 to 1991, The Munsters Today was one of the most prominent. Sequels. The strategy used by this follow-up series was intriguing. Rather than jumping straight to the original, it revealed that Grandpa had unintentionally put the family into a 22-year deep sleep. Upon awakening, they discovered that they were in the late 1980s and were attempting to adapt to a new time period. With Howard Morton as Grandpa, Jason Marsden as Eddie, and Lee Meriwether as Lily, the show outlasted the original series, spanning 73 episodes. The first full-length Munsters film was released in 1966, right before the conclusion of the original series, and it was called Munster Go Home. Audiences had never seen the Munsters in color before. It added even more strikingness to their haunting yet charming faces. Herman's inheritance of a British property set the stage for a crazy adventure in England, complete with a drag race, a buried treasure, and cunning relatives. The return of Fred Gwynne, Yvonne De Carlo, and Al Lewis as Herman, Lily, and Grandpa preserved the essence of the series. A number of made-for-TV films were an attempt to bring the series back to life. Most of the original ensemble was reunited in The Munsters' Revenge, 1981, but the show didn't garner enough interest to return. With fresh performers, 2 more TV films attempted to recreate the enchantment in the 1990s, but none of them made an impression. The situation with reboots, however, has been different. While many have attempted to revive the Munsters, few have succeeded. In 2012, NBC produced a darker, more dramatic version of the series, Mockingbird Lane, which was directed by Bryan Singer and starred Jerry O'Connell as Herman. Although it had excellent production values, it didn't make it past the pilot episode. An attempt was made in 2017 to move the Munsters to trendy Brooklyn, but the plan was swiftly dropped. In 2022, filmmaker Rob Zombie made the most recent attempt to bring the Munsters back to life. In contrast to other attempts, Zombie's version mostly relied on campy comedy and an exaggerated, colorful style. Audiences were split by the film, which starred Daniel Roebuck as Grandpa, Sherry Moon Zombie as Lily, and Jeff Daniel Phillips as Herman. While some fans praised its nostalgic tone, others thought the narrative lacked depth. Nevertheless, its Netflix release maintained the Munsters' public profile, demonstrating the family's continued relevance in popular culture. You may see that impact in movies, TV shows, and music. Several times, particularly in their Treehouse of Horror episodes, television programs such as The Simpsons have honored the Munsters. Eddie Munster served as some inspiration for Stranger Things' Eddie Munson character, demonstrating the show's profound cultural influence. The fact that numerous musicians have covered the show's famous theme song throughout the years demonstrates how recognized it is even now. However, the characters are what really set the Munsters apart. Fred Gwynne's original portrayal of Herman Munster came to represent the fun and spirit of the program. He was a kind and humorous father figure despite his Frankenstein-like look, demonstrating that even monsters can be adored. Innumerable television programs and motion pictures have mocked and copied his loud, booming laugh and youthful excitement. Another level of humor was added by Al Lewis's portrayal of Grandpa Munster. An eccentric vampire with a penchant for crazy experiments, he was often stirring up problems in his lab in the basement. His sly nature and classic Dracula charm made him one of the most adored characters. Other humorous interpretations of vampires over the years also reflect his impact. The Munsters' influence goes beyond simple nostalgia. It contributed to the development of sitcoms that combine humor and the paranormal. Compared to that of The Addams Family, which simultaneously aired. Despite having somewhat different tone, The Addams Family tended toward dark humor, whereas The Munsters was more lighthearted. Later television programs like Stranger Things, which blends supernatural themes with realistic family relationships, and What We Do in the Shadows, which strikes a balance between vampire mythology and ridiculous humor, were influenced by this blend of comedy and horror. By making its hideous characters the most wholesome aspect of the show, The Munsters was a critique of the ideal American family rather than merely a gimmick about monsters living in suburbia. Decades later, that allure endures, demonstrating that the Munsters' basic mystique endures despite the prevalence of contemporary comedies and expensive reboots.